You are listening to Down Home. This week, the Down Home podcast continues with the second part of a conversation with award-winning poet, author, and activist Dr. George Elliott Clarke. Listen in as Dr. Clarke talks about his poetic inspiration and the role that white supremacy plays in our Canadian culture as well as global political events. If you haven't heard the first part of the conversation, it can be found in the episode list. I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience by two black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
I want to talk about your poetry. You've been doing poetry obviously a long time, and just talking about what you did. You went through this time in the 70s, I guess, where you were inspired by what it's called your gang of seven intellectuals. Could you talk about how they inspired your poetry? I mean, I'll get you to list off the names if you want, and you can just tell that story. But how did they influence you?
Well, it's fascinating. It really is, because of the fact that I gotta send out some more props here immediately. Okay, like everybody, I went through high school, junior high school, but particularly high school, Queen Elizabeth High School, Halifax, 75 to 78. Those are my years of going from grade 10 to grade 12. Mm-hmm. And in those 3 years, there was absolutely no exposure to Black history, to anything that had to do with Black culture. And for that matter, there was no exposure to real history, which has to do with struggle, which has to do with establishment versus the people, which has to do with elites versus the people. There was none of that. So luckily for me, I fell in with a group of six, if not gang of six, and they were Rocky Jones, great Black community radical, and thinker and mover and shaker. Joan Jones, who was just as radical and just as influential a thinker and mover and shaker, his then wife. Walter Borden, playwright, poet, editor, man of words, actor, a man of letters, man about town, always hanging out with James Baldwin under his arm, stack of James Baldwin under his arm, and a cigarette and a coffee at play, at work all the time, right? Yeah. And then along with those three, there was also Sylvia, as I already mentioned, Sylvia Hamilton, who was activist, community activist, and intellectual, as the other three were, and also her husband, Bev Greenlaw, another community activist, intellectual, and basketball coach. Very strongly connected to the Black community as well. And then Jackie Barkley. If Jackie ever listens to this or hears this, I know that she will be proud of me to mention the fact that she was an authentic, card-carrying, fire-breathing communist, Marxist-Leninist. Amen. And so I had those six folks giving me books, giving me records, giving me editorials to read, and of course access to poetry and the Bob Dylan records and the Malcolm X speeches. And so what I'm trying to say here is that between the ages of 17 and 19, I went to the real school. I went to the real college, the college that made me an intellectual, not just somebody who had a high school diploma, but someone trained to think critically about our society and its constitutive bases, economically, sociologically, politically, and so on. And so once they turned me on to reading political science and history and sociology, yes, I picked up all of the Black history I could, including Black Nova Scotian history via James Walker. But then also, I read Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his great essays on liberalism, political thought, approaches to politics. I still hardly recommend it to anybody who wants to take a crash course in how to understand liberal democracy. You got to read PET. Of course, I read Malcolm X, the autobiography, but then the speeches, and imbibed as much of that as I could. Hanging out at the Joneses' house, I had to listen to Bob Dylan records, and I actually borrowed a Bob Dylan record, which I still have. Sorry, Tracy, I still got it for crying out loud, but that got me listening to Bob Dylan up the yin yang, especially of the 1960s, and trying to write poetry emulating his songwriting style, his lyricism. So I've mentioned Malcolm, I've mentioned Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Irving Layton is a Canadian poet, a Jewish Canadian poet of Montreal, who I also admired very much for his chutzpah, his cojones, his outspokenness on anything at all that he wanted to speak out about. So he was another important influence. When I got into really studying poetry and thinking through poetry, I happened upon Ezra Pound, whose personal politics were quite awful. He was anti-Semitic, he was pro-fascist during the Second World War. So his personal politics were reprehensible, absolutely. But his poetry really spoke to me. I loved the fact that he was able to write complex poems that actually sounded very simple, that came across as everyday speech. And so that was important to me. And his poetry has remained a very important barometer for me in terms of thinking about how to treat even complex subjects in ways that I hope are down to earth and accessible and open. So he became another important constituent of my brain trust, so to speak. And then because I was reading all of that Marxist and Malcolm X thought and so on, not to mention all the Afrocentric stuff that I mean, Walter, I'm only chuckling because of the memory coming back to me of Walter Borden expounding on Joseph Benjo-Cannon and his theses about all of history, basically deriving not just history, civilization itself, that all global civilization comes out of Egypt, that all theology comes out of Egypt, and the effort of Eurocentric white supremacist academics and intellectuals to erase the great Egyptian contribution to all of the world's major religions and the ways that societies have thought to structure themselves ever since. And of course, the argument that Egyptian philosophy and theology was at the root of Bollywood Greek philosophy and theology. So, but I was chuckling because Walter was, in between drinking the coffee, smoking the cigarette, and eating clams and chips or cream pie. He'd be talking to me about, you got to understand Joseph Benjo-Cannon, right? And I said, okay, I'm getting it. All right. But because of all that, I also ended up reading, because of Jackie Barkley, she gave me a set of books by Mao Zedong, which I still have, Jackie. I still have them, especially the five essays on philosophy. And I was down with Mao because of that. I was like, okay, I know the historians, but will tell us, yes, he was a horrible tyrant. I would never want to live under his regime. I probably would not have survived if I ever had to live under his regime. But the fact of the matter is, he did liberate China from European oppression. And something which still bothers the West to this day. I think, I'm not going to get off tangent here, but I'll just let everybody know. I'll share with you my own private personal thought. That the West is planning a war with China. You heard it here first. The West is planning to go to war with China because China has done the unthinkable. It's a nation governed by people of color who now have an economy that is greater than America's. And it's also not entirely indebted. America may still be a very rich country, but it owes trillions to everybody. Trillions.
Including China.
Yeah, that's right. So it's actually a pauper country propped up by the petrodollar and its nuclear weapons. That's it. So the authentically wealthy country is China. And there are. I mean, you got to keep this. I promise, I'm not going to get off on a tangent, but I want to share with everybody a basic fact of world history. For 500 years, 1492 to the present, Western Europe, Caucasian Europe has dominated the world. That's a fact. That's a simple fact.
Yeah.
They've dominated the world because they enslaved and colonized the rest of the world.
Yes.
Enslaved and colonized the rest of the world. I'm not going to apologize for the fact, for history. That's the truth. And guess what? They got rich and they got powerful. And guess what? They don't want to let that go.
No, of course not.
They don't want to let that go. That's been a good thing for 500 years for folks who represent only 15% of the world's population.
Yeah.
They represent 15% of the world's population and gobble up the vast majority of the world's wealth.
At least 90%.
Yeah. And so it has benefited them greatly. And they'll talk about human rights and civil liberties and revolutions, so on and so forth. But the bottom line is white supremacy.
Yeah.
You know, we want to keep the dollars coming to us. We want to keep you working for us. We want to keep you bowing down to us and accepting us as being your overlords. And if you won't accept it, we're going to throw some nuclear weapons at you or threaten you with nuclear weapons and then call you the violator of human rights.
Yeah.
And then call you the tyranny, call you the people who are violating human rights and civil liberties. And then, not to get off on a tangent, I think about the U.S. Supreme Court's recent decisions. Women, trying to enslave women, trying to deprive Americans of color of their voting rights, and so on. And I ask, who's the tyranny?
Yeah.
Who's the tyranny? Who has gone around the world executing coups, left, right, and center? No political pun intended, but the coups are left, right, and center. That they have masterminded and backed to benefit themselves, not those populations whose governments, even when they're democratically elected, they will overthrow them because they want to control their oil. They want to control some other commodity that's important for them, or they want to have an ally in their struggles, existential struggles against Russia or against China or anybody else that they decide is not towing the line as far as their foreign policy and economic interests dictate.
Yeah, very true. It's unfortunate that the term white supremacy has been tied to organizations like the KKK and skinheads, because white supremacy isn't exactly that. It's more akin to what you're saying. Yeah. White supremacy is what we swim in every day. Right?
Power.
It's that power base. It's that that grab onto power that's not being let go of. That is white supremacy.
Maintaining the status quo is basically white supremacy, you know?
Yeah, that's right. With a lot of window dressing about, we think so-and-so's a dictator, we think so-and-so's a tyrant, we're against so-and-so is denying their people civil liberties and human rights and so-and-so. And it's all just propaganda, rhetoric. I'm sorry to have to say that, but for the most part, it is. Because once that tyrant is toppled, once that dictator is removed, does life actually improve for those people on the ground? I'm thinking of Libya, for instance. The fact that NATO, which is supposedly North Atlantic Treaty Organization, took it upon itself to blast and bomb Libya because of the fact that I guess they thought Gaddafi his day had to come to an end in the name of the Arab Spring. And the supposed coming into fruition of real democracy in that part of the world. And the U.S. suddenly jumped on it and said, yes, we're in favor of this. Even though they've been propping up lots of dictators in the Middle East forever. Propping them up forever, including Saddam Hussein when he was at war with Iran. Right? I just got to say it point blank. We got to understand that W.E.B. Du Bois was correct. Du Bois argued in 1903 that the problem of the color line is the problem of the 20th century. Or to put it the way he actually put it, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. The only amendment that I think we need to make to Du Bois's wise pronouncement more than 100 years ago is that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the color line. The fact that those who have benefited from 500 years of imperialism, colonialism, enslavement of people of color, ripping off their resources, stealing their lands, for crying out loud, pauperizing millions of people, displacing millions of people, killing millions of people, like the 5 million who were killed by Leopold II in Belgium.
Mm.
of Belgium in terms of the Congo, which he ran as his personal fiefdom, his own private company. That's what it was, a corporation
Hmm.
for Leopold II. 5 million people
Yeah.
maimed and murdered because of the fact that he didn't feel that they were digging up enough diamonds or tapping enough rubber to suit his interests, suit his coffers.
Hmm.
So when I go to Brussels and I look upon all the gleaming marble, all the great works of art, all the gold here and the silver there and brass, blah, 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 I'm not deluded. I don't think, oh, wow, look at the brilliance of the Belgians. I don't think that. I just think how they looted
Yes.
the Congo to build themselves up
Oh, yes.
and to pretend to be some kind of first-rate power when they're a second-rate power. Always were, still
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And the only benefit they ever got was enslaving and dissecting and savaging, ravaging the Congo, and still have the nerve not to offer reparations.
Mm.
Oh, no, please, folks, I gotta mention the R word. Reparations are on the table.
Yeah.
Reparations are on the table. I don't blame Jamaica and Barbados for saying we don't need the British royal family anymore. We
Yeah.
don't need them.
Yeah.
And besides, when are they going to start paying us back for the centuries of slave labor that enriched them,
Very
that
much
enriched
so.
Great Britain when it was Great Britain and
Hmm.
not simply the United Kingdom,
Mhm.
right? So I guess what I'm trying to say here in a long distance way, and I'll cut it short. Folks, everybody know the history, please. Just grab the history.
Over the course of doing our podcast, we've had a lot of guests talk about how Canadian history in the Canadian education system is whitewashed. Can you give us some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well,
We're ready. We're ready.
it's true.
Yeah.
We gotta keep in mind, like, some of the facts. I always tell this or say this to my students. We got to understand the structure of the society, how society is structured. Everything. Malcolm X argued this as well. In talking to African Americans, he would advise, pay attention to the political structures, pay attention to the Constitution. And talking about Canada and the whitewashing that goes on in Canada, we have to do the same thing. We got to understand the nature of where we are, the nature of where we live, and it's all very simple. As most things are very simple. And I know we can make complications out of them, but ultimately they're pretty simple. Canada is a monarchy. I know that that's a very stupid, self-evident thing to say. But here's the elaboration on that concept. Because it's a monarchy, it's also a hierarchy. You can't have a king or a queen without having subjects.
Mhm.
The royals are superior to everybody else. It's a hierarchical system. You got a monarchy, you got some people who are way better than others, and you got other people who are not as good as others because they're under the monarch, right? And so Canada has been constructed as a monarchy, and the Constitution says so. Anybody who thinks I'm crazy, just read the Constitution. It says that we're going to set it up like it's the United Kingdom, like it's Great Britain, right?
Mhm.
That's the second sentence of the BNA Act, 1867, says that Canada is being put together. Confederation is happening to promote the interests of Great Britain.
Mhm.
So it wasn't to say, oh, we want you Canadians, and we want you to live better, have better lives. No, we're putting you together to support our imperialist interests, Canada, right? So it's a monarchy. And so because it's a monarchy, it's a hierarchy. Because it's a hierarchy, it means that some Canadians have more status, simply more status than others. And I want everybody to think about this. Status is the secret word in Canadian political parlance. Immigrants are checked about their status. Indigenous people have status or they don't have status. There's even the status of women. But status is the way that Canada, in terms of the bureaucracy, thinks about the citizenry. And there's a book I will mention called The Vertical Mosaic, first published in 1965 by John Porter. The Vertical Mosaic, which fleshes out this argument that I am presenting right now. And to make it really simple, The vertical mosaic argues that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Canadians are at the top. It's their monarch who's on the throne. I like to remind people about that. The monarch is not an entity that's completely like colorless or valueless. There's a reason why our monarch is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, because she is their monarch.
Yeah.
So we have a monarch who's at the very top of the Canadian political system. And a lot of people say, no, the Queen's only a figurehead. Tell her that. Tell the Queen she's only a figurehead. She knows she's got lots of reserved powers of the crown under our Constitution. She is, in fact, the ultimate power if she were to choose to exercise it. It's by constitutional convention that she does not exercise it, but she still has ultimate power. So the person with the ultimate power in Canada is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That means that everybody else in Canada who's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant is close to the Queen. The way Canadian racism and prejudice works is the closer you are to the monarch in race, in accent, in language, in class, in religion, and in wealth, of course, class, the more status you have in Canada. So even if you're a pauper and you don't have a pot to pee in, but you have a British accent and a white skin, you can go almost anywhere.
Yeah.
Because that's your status. Your status puts you as being close to the Queen. Even if you have nothing to do with her in terms of your class, even if your religion is a cult, so long as nobody checks to see what your religion is, and you've got your white privilege and you've got a British accent, you can go almost anywhere and get almost anything in this country.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that your accent classifies you as being better than the average Canadian. Just your accent alone.
Yeah.
And then the secondary group of Canadians, are French Canadians. French Canadian Catholics are secondary. And then everybody else, because they even talk about two founding peoples, that's what they mean. Everybody else takes their place in the pecking order in terms of how close they come to the monarch or not, or how close they come to the French Canadian Catholic standard or not. And for Blacks and Indigenous, we've always been ranked at the bottom, always ranked at the bottom in this hierarchically organized monarchical society. And anybody who wants to come and say, well, Canada knows it's all egalitarian, multicultural, and so on. Yes, yeah, that's right. We pay lip service to equality of opportunity. And yes, we are a multicultural society. Absolutely. But the distribution of wealth and privilege and power, wealth, privilege, and power is still according to the ranking of various ethnicities and so-called races in the country, down to the bottom, which is where we are, Blacks and Indigenous, the lumpen proletariat. So, for the most part. So, I ask our audience to understand the nature of the country that we inhabit. And if we want to take steps, to be activists to push back against these pernicious inequalities, then we need to be able to understand what it is we have to fight against. And I'll just say, for anybody who thinks I'm being unpatriotic, I love my country. I'm a proud Canadian. I love my Canadian passport. Thank you very much. But I also take seriously the motto of the Order of Canada. They wanted a better country. I want a better country. And that's why I am critical of the way our country is set up. But I also think that it's not going to change unless the vast majority of Canadians understand for ourselves how our country has been organized. It's important to recognize that John A. Macdonald, of course, oversaw the instantiation of the residential school system to try to eliminate Indigenous people as Indigenous cultures. It's also important to recognize John A. Macdonald actually advocated lynching of Black men. Yes, the founder of Canada, Confederation, leader of Confederation for Canada, advocated publicly the lynching of Black men because he argued that it was the only way to ensure that white women would be protected from potential Black rapists. And we don't read that in history books. We don't. But of course, he's the same guy who put together the Northwest Mounted Police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yeah.
So when the RCMP acts in a racist and sexist way towards Black people and Indigenous people in particular, they're coming from established bureaucratic governmental wisdom, in quotation marks. Wisdom.
That's why they were set up.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Keep the train moving.
Yeah. So that myth of meritocracy that's pushed by educational systems, political systems, and it's been pushed, that myth has been pushed for so long. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's part of the whitewashing of the history and the culture, because the other thing I got to say is not only are we a hierarchical society that maintains the hierarchies based on notions of status for different peoples in different parts of the country and so on, it is also a country that has always had an existential problem, which is, why does it exist? Because geographically, economically, it would make more sense for Canada to be part of the United States.
Yeah.
Trade flows, economic flows, and even population flows, tourism at least, are north-south.
Yeah.
So it would make sense for Canada to be part of the United States. Americans think so. They can't understand why Canada's a separate country.
Yeah.
The reason why was because of British imperialism. The British in the mid-19th century, looking at the map of the world in the same way Americans do now, the British started that whole idea of, how do you maintain imperialism? Well, you got to understand who your rivals are going to be. And so the British looked at a map of the world in the 1860s, and they said, we've only got two rivals coming up who can disturb our power, who can knock Great Britain off its pedestal as being the #1 power in the world. And they identified them easily, Germany and America. So Britain had to do things in Europe to try to keep Germany under control. And in order to keep America under control and to frustrate Manifest Destiny, it created Canada. And anybody who doubts this, look at your map. Look at where Canada is. Look where it sits, east-west, on top of the United States.
Yeah.
The formation of Canada was to stop the United States. It was to put a cap on the United States. I got my lens cleanser here. So here's the U.S., here's Canada. Boom. Boom, Canada sits right on top of the U.S. And that's to check, to block its northward expansion. That was the purpose for the creation of Canada. This to further the interests of the British Empire. Further proof of this is the fact that after World War II, when Britain was definitely very weak and impoverished, and basically about to lose its empire.
Yeah.
Because Gandhi was about to kick him out of India, and what is now Pakistan. Mao was kicking them out of China. Gandhi is kicking them out of India, right? So they're losing their empire, and they don't like it, but there's nothing they can do about it because they got no military left anymore to do very much. They got to rely on the United States, which was actually Churchill's notion, Churchill's idea. So what they then decide to do is to try to prevent America from grabbing the West Indies. They asked Canada for 50 years. Derek, for 50 years, there were secret talks between Ottawa and London about Ottawa annexing the British West Indies. If they had done it, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad would all be Canadian provinces.
Yeah, I read that.
But that didn't happen because Mackenzie King, talking to his dead mom through his dog, got the communication from his mother that this would be a bad idea. So we got Newfoundland instead.
Well, that explains a lot. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just totally kidding.
Yeah, I know. So to come back to the basic point here, the existential crisis for Canada is, why aren't we American? Now, it's different for Quebecois and other French Canadians who've always had a greater sense of territorial possession than English Canadians have had, for the most part. So English Canada has always been asking the question, who are we, what are we, what's our identity, blah, 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 the famous identity problem question. is because of the fact that United Empire loyalists ended up coming to Canada. 10% of them were black, of course. Ended up coming to colonial Canada, British North America, and grieving the fact that they've been kicked out of the revolutionary United States. They've been kicked out as Tories, for crying out loud. And so they've never been able to really work with that. So then what developed was a great propaganda campaign, and I challenge our audience to pay attention. I challenge you every single day. Just choose one day of the week and listen to the news. You choose the news you want to listen to, so long as it's a Canadian newscast. And I promise you that at least once a day, there's going to be a story that positions the United States as crazy, as unlawful, as illogical, as nasty, as dangerous, as violent, blah, blah, blah. And in contrast, Canada will be positioned as the peaceable kingdom, where everything is nice, people are kind, we're polite and courteous, and we're friendly. We don't go around the world knocking over governments. Yeah. We don't have racism. We never had slavery. Yeah. And what I'm trying to get at here is that we've been giving ourselves this propaganda ever since Canada was formed, 1867. We've given ourselves 150 plus years of propaganda, to 155 years, precisely this year, 155 years of propaganda, just pure propaganda, lies about our history to try to position ourselves as being better than America. Yeah, which has always been the bottom line, especially for English Canada. We've always got to say that we're better than America. Psychologically, it's important because we have to justify our existence. Because we never came together because we wanted to come together. Yeah, we came together because we were pushed together by Britain.
Yeah, it's that's a very interesting take of it. But when you think about it, like you said, and you sit down, and you think about our history. That's definitely, it fits into place. I have to say. Dr. Clarke, this has been an amazing afternoon. Yeah. To hear a little bit about your history, and get your Scotian story, hear a little bit about your poetry, and to get some of your views, which, to be honest, our podcast does agree with, because we've been, through 45 episodes, we've actually been talking about these issues as well. Yeah, for sure. Do you have anything to add just before we wrap up?
Oh my golly. What a great experience it is to share these ideas and to share our history, about which I want us all to be very proud. No matter how poor, no matter how oppressed, no matter how illiterate our ancestors were in Nova Scotia, we need to be proud of the fact that they maintained a Black community without support from anywhere. African America was not coming to help. The West Indies were not coming to help. Africa was not coming to help. Our ancestors created a distinctive Black culture on the far reaches of the North Atlantic. Icebergs, polar bears, and there we are. Yeah. Right? Refuting, and the people who invented the slap shot, for crying out loud, the Maritime Colored Hockey League. The slap shot comes from us, for crying out loud. So we are one of the greatest northernmost expressions of African culture in the world. We never think about that. But we are a northern Black people, a Nordic Black people. We never think of ourselves that way. That's who we are. We can skate. We can shoot. We can do slap shots, for crying out loud, not just dunking basketballs. And that is also our heritage. And we should own it. Yes. We should own that. Yeah. We have been a great people for military prowess, for cultural achievement, for sports accomplishment, for theology. To build a church out of nothing in the face of white oppression and dare to call it the African Baptist Association. I think that's something to stand up and cheer about. Nobody else was going to be able to come and do that for us. Yeah. They could have built a church and just called it the Baptist Church. But no, it's an African Baptist Church. Thank you, Richard Preston. Thank you, Septimus Clark. Thank you, Louisa Bailey, for building that church and giving it that moniker and saying that's what we're going to stand for in the snow. We're going to sit up here in the snow and worship the Lord. Come on. That's crazy. It's beautiful, crazy. So I think that we need to embrace all of that and understand just how powerful it is and that we can make our art and do our politics and do our sports knowing that we come from a powerful lineage of people who are able to survive all the cold, all the disease, all the malnutrition, all the starvation, all the indigenous, sorry, not indigenous, excuse me, indigent circumstances to which our ancestors were subjected, and deliberately so be forced to leave. We got to remember that there were laws in some of the Nova Scotian towns, Yarmouth and Digby and New Glasgow, I can say for sure. They had sunset laws.
Oh,
That said,
yeah.
if you're black, you got to get out of town by sundown.
Yeah, sundown towns.
In New Glasgow, they used to have roving bands of white men whose job it was to police the town to make sure there were no black men, especially in town after the sun went down.
Yeah.
So that's the condition into which Viola Desmond stepped in 1946 without knowing it.
Yeah.
That ended up with her being thrown into prison,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are the circumstances. And we should always remember that and call people, the West is always something we're going to call into account. They need to be called into account. I want them to go to The Hague and sit in little glass boxes and answer for their crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
They should be over there. W should be sitting over there, for crying out loud. Not just, rinky-dink dictators from this tin pot dictatorship or another,
Yeah.
but the real villains. They should be sitting up there.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we can give them good defenses. We'll give them free lawyering, no problem. We'll help them look at the evidence and try to figure out a way to escape. But the fact that they are not sitting there just underlines the power imbalances that we have and the hypocrisy of those power imbalances. But I need to end up as you've been asking me to do, and I should end up with a poem. And I got to say, my memory is not as great as it used to be for some things. So
it's hard to memorize poems. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you.
All right. I'm going to try to recite Look Homeward, Exile.
Okay.
So here it is. And this is a poem I wrote when I went to Europe for the first time, 1985. I was sitting in a laundromat with a raspberry milkshake from McDonald's, watching my clothes spin around in the dryer, I think. And suddenly I was thinking about 3 Mile Plains, Newport Station, Green Street, people I knew from there, and family history and so on. And this poem came to me at that point. Look homeward, exile. I can still see that soil crimsoned by butchered hog and imbrued with wry lie and homely spirituals everybody must know. Still dream of folks who broke or cracked like shale. Pushkin, who twisted his hands in boxing. Morocco, who ran girls like dogs and got stabbed. Lavinia, her teeth decayed to black stumps, her lovemaking still in demand, spitting black phlegm. Her pension after 20 towns. And Tooth, suckled on anger that no Baptist church could contain, who let wrinkled Ely seed her moist womb when she was just 13. And the tyrant sun that reared from barbed wire spewed flame that charred the idiot crops to depression, and hurt my granddaddy to bottle after bottle of sweet death, his dreams beaten to one tremendous pulp, until his heart seized, choked, his love gave out. But beauty survived, secreted in freight trains snorting in their pins, and babes whose faces were coal black mirrors, and strange strummers who plucked Ghanaian banjos, hummed blind blues precise, ornate, plumb needlepoint, in sermons scorched with sulfur and brimstone, and in my love's dark orient skin that smelt like orange peels and tasted like rum. Good God! I remember my creator in the old ways. I sit in taverns and stare at my fists. I net earth into bread, spell water into wine. Still nothing warns my wintry exile, neither prayers nor fine love, neither votes nor hard drink. For nothing heals those saints felled in green beds, whose loves are smashed by just one word or glance, or pain, a screw jammed in thick, straining wood.
Wow.
Powerful.
He snaps up, man.
Powerful.
Thank you,
Wow.
Jay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Well,
Dr. Clarke. My goodness.
yes, thank you, Dr. Clarke. I just want to say it's been great to hear the stories. It's been great to hear the history. It's been great to hear the passion, the poetry, and the fact that we could be family as well is also kind of a cool thing as well. So, on this journey of doing this podcast, we've interviewed a lot of the names that you mentioned. We interviewed Walter Borden. We interviewed Shelley Hamilton, who I know is a friend of yours, and but the one common thread is the community of Nova Scotia, whether or not we're intellectual or whatever the case may be. The fact that you shared your stories with these same people that always held up this integrity of what the Black community in Nova Scotia was supposed to be is very good to see, and reminisce and know that we came from such a strong community, and you're keeping that going forward. I'm saying too much, but I just want to say it was great to interview you.
Well, if I've got a couple minutes left, I will share one more anecdote with you, jumping off this idea of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned during the interview about finishing my doctorate and going to teach at Duke. But before I got to go to Duke, I had a period of time where I wasn't being hired. Nobody seemed to be very interested in what I had written about in terms of Black American and white Canadian poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But I had my doctorate. I was Dr. George Elliott Clarke. So I told Charlie Saunders, the late Charles Saunders, when he was a columnist for the Daily News, that, and he was my friend. So I told him that, hey, I just finished completed my doctorate, and he put something in his column or he mentioned it to people. And so then all of a sudden, in January 1994, on a bitterly cold January night, Saturday night, I get invited to come to Halifax by the North End community, Black and white, to celebrate my doctorate. That was really special, really sweet. So 100 people came out, and they put my face up on posters on lampposts all over the North End. Come and meet Dr. George Elliott Clarke. I didn't even have a teaching job yet, but I went home. I went to North Branch Library. 100 people came out. Rocky was there. Sylvia was there. Jackie was there. They all spoke, and David Woods was there. They had singers. They had dancers. They had poets reciting, all to celebrate the fact that a boy from the hood got a doctorate.
Yeah.
And I mention that just to accent how special that is.
Yeah.
I mean, how weirdly beautiful that is.
Hey, you're not lying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of our community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like me and Jay, we just before we wrap up, me and Jay went home to visit last month.
Yeah.
And we were walking through the North End on Godkin Street. And literally, Jay's cousin said, "Hey, Jay." And then we spent the next 40 minutes on the side of the road talking to a bunch of people that we had no intention of bumping into.
Yeah.
That's our community.
Yeah.
That's our community.
Yeah. It's important to remember that, if anything, when push comes to shove, anyway, anyhow, remember that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Send shivers down my spine.
Hey, that's cool. That's a family thing. But it was a pleasure to interview, and thanks so much for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Jones, Mr. Wise. Thank you. God bless.
Okay,
God bless,
take care.
God bless.
All right.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey everybody, thank you very much for enjoying that last episode of Down Home. We're going into hiatus again like we did last year. So yes, thank you very much for your support over the last how's it was it 4 months?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, last 4 months. So we will be back again. Don't worry, we're not putting it down. We're gonna continue the fight. We will be back again in February of 2023.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening, taking your time to enjoy and comment on these conversations. If there's anything you want to like to see us tackle, send us a message on our Instagram or Facebook, and we'll try to do so. But we enjoy what we're doing. It's a passion project that has continued and got us through COVID, so it's a good time. Thanks for tuning in. And Derek is awesome, so give him a hand.
Well, Jay Jones is awesome too. So
word.
Yeah, Jay Jones books the guests. So if you know anyone that wants to add their voice to our conversation, contact us and Jay there through our email or one of our social networks there. All
Peace
right.
and love always.
All right, bye. The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.